My mother looked at my 2 children and chose my cheating husband's side. Then she closed the door on her own grandchildren. I made one promise to myself, standing on that porch. By the time she wanted back in, I wouldn't need her anymore. 18 months later, I don't. My name is Nadia. I'm 37 years old, and I want to tell you about the other side of that porch, not because someone rescued me. Not because the system worked in my favor, but because of one decision I made the moment that door clicked shut. You don't need to be saved to rebuild. You need to stop waiting for the people who should have saved you. Jerome and I were married for 9 years, long enough to forget who I was before him. He was charming in the specific way that looks like stability from the outside, consistent at his job, good at appearances, quietly allergic to accountability when it actually counted. He traveled constantly. Somewhere inside those trips, he found someone who didn't yet know what I'd already figured out. I found out through a forwarded text chain. 3 sentences. 45 seconds. 9 years gone. I filed for divorce in March. In April, I drove to my mother's house with Marcus and Delia in the back seat. Marcus was 11, quiet, watchful, the kind of kid who understands more than he says out loud. Delia was 8, loud, bright, completely certain she was running the entire world. They didn't fully understand what was happening, but kids always know when the air changes. They feel it before they can name it. My mother Yvette answered the door. My father Malcolm stood behind her, present and largely ornamental. I explained what Jerome had done. I asked for 3 weeks in the guest room. 3 weeks to stabilize before the legal process moved forward. That is all I was asking. 3 weeks. Yvette looked at Marcus. She looked at Delia. She looked back at me. "You made your bed, Nadia," she said. And she started to close the door. What my brother said from inside that house, from inside the house he'd lived in rent-free for 6 years, Derek was 39 years old. He occupied my parents' basement, behind 3 gaming monitors bought on money they'd lent him. He ran a YouTube channel with 214 subscribers and called himself a content creator. He was not. He leaned around my mother's shoulder with a half grin and said, "Honestly, Nadia, maybe just try to work it out. Jerome's always been a solid guy." Then the door clicked shut. I stood on that porch with an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old and a duffel bag I'd packed in 20 minutes. The feeling was right there, pressing against the back of my throat, immediate and real. But Marcus was watching me with that quiet, measuring look he gets when he's calculating how worried to be. I was not going to become the answer to that question, not in front of them. I buckled them in. I drove to a motel 20 minutes outside of town. 2 beds, a vending machine in the hallway, curtains that didn't fully close. Delia announced it was the most exciting place she'd ever slept. I told her yes. I tucked her in. I waited until both of them were asleep. Then I sat on the bathroom floor and let myself feel it. Not just the marriage. Not just Jerome. The door. The specific weight of your own mother's decision the night you needed her most. That is a different category of loss, the shape of something you'd relied on your entire life, revealing itself as hollow. I sat there until I could breathe normally. Then I washed my face. Then I walked back out and was their mother again. What the next 6 weeks required of me was harder than that porch. And that porch was the thing I had been certain would break me. Have you ever had to function completely on the outside while something inside you was still in the process of collapsing? 5 weeks in that motel. Marcus doing homework on a desk the size of a carry-on lid. Delia organizing everything in our bags into systems only she fully understood. I worked every hour I could, regular shifts plus every overtime slot my supervisor approved. 3 nights in that stretch, dinner was crackers and a gas station banana because I'd used the last of my cash on new sneakers for Marcus. He'd had a growth spurt mid-month and was walking in shoes 2 sizes small. That was not a compromise I was making. I'm telling you because this is what rebuilding actually looks like. Not a pivot moment, not a motivational montage. It looks like crackers. It looks like a bathroom floor at midnight. It looks like doing the hardest version of everything for 3 consecutive days on 3 hours of sleep because the alternative is failing the 2 people who need you to not fail. You keep doing it, and something shifts. Not a breakthrough, something quieter. You stop surviving, and you start operating. That shift didn't come from a revelation. It came from someone who was simply paying attention. My supervisor Greta was sharp and plain-spoken honest in the specific way that means she rarely says things she doesn't mean. She called me into her office one afternoon and asked directly, "Are you in a difficult situation right now?" I said yes. She didn't offer pity. She offered a full-time position with a 20% pay increase and complete benefits starting the following month. I accepted before she finished the sentence. That job became the first solid floor I built everything else on. What if the first real step out of the worst chapter of your life looks like something as unglamorous as a yes you almost weren't brave enough to say? The most painful part of my divorce was never about Jerome. It was discovering that the family I had believed was my foundation was actually a feeling I had been maintaining alone, not a commitment they had ever made. My attorney was methodical. Thorough. Jerome had hired an aggressive firm. He wanted a custody arrangement giving him close to half the children's time. I'll be generous and say he genuinely believed he wanted that. But wanting something and being prepared for it are entirely different things. Jerome had never handled school pickup, pediatric appointments, or the 2 a.m. conversations about nightmares. He had no documented record of parental involvement. I had 9 years of it. Every permission slip, every medical record, every daycare log, every emergency contact form, always my name. Every field trip approval. Documented, time-stamped, factual. His attorney called it shared parenting commitment. My attorney called it a record. There is a significant difference between a narrative and a record. What the custody evaluators' written conclusions said about Jerome's consistent parental engagement, the courtroom, wasn't where I rebuilt my life. That happened in motel rooms and overtime shifts and an apartment kitchen with 1 working drawer. But the courtroom is where what I had already built got officially confirmed. What was at stake in that hearing was not just custody. It was documentation of 9 years of invisible labor that Jerome's attorney was attempting to erase with a single phrase. I was not going to let that phrase stand. The hearing was a Wednesday morning in early November. I wore a dark blazer I'd bought specifically for that day, the kind of detail that matters when you need everything around you to feel intentional. Marcus and Delia were at school. I refused to let them carry this day. You protect the routine. You protect the ordinary. You keep the ground stable under them even when it's shaking under you. Jerome was across the room. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say that wasn't already in the filings. Jerome's attorney had constructed a narrative. My attorney had assembled a record. 9 years of school emergency contacts, always my name. 9 years of pediatric records, therapy intake forms, daycare check-in logs, field trip permissions, my handwriting, my signature, my phone number, every single time. A custody evaluation that asked not what a parent intended to do, but what they had actually, documentably done. Primary physical custody was awarded to me. Jerome received alternating weekends and designated school breaks. He also owed 15 months of retroactive child support that his legal team had been attempting to reclassify through creative interpretation. The judge received those interpretations with what I would describe carefully as professional skepticism. The retroactive support was awarded in full. I sat in that courtroom, and I did not cry. Not because I was performing composure, because I was so far past the version of myself who would have needed to. The ruling was confirmation. I had already built the thing I was now being told I was legally entitled to protect. Verdicts document what already exists. They don't create it. Winning in court didn't feel like victory. It felt like documentation. Have you ever worked so hard to prove about the people who abandoned you at your lowest point? You'd already moved past needing it. Never acknowledge what they actually did. They'll call it complexity. They'll say they didn't want to take sides. They'll find language that positions them as worried, overwhelmed, reasonable people doing their best in a confusing situation. What you will hear in that language, if you listen carefully, is a request for forgiveness without the actual cost of the apology. And once you hear it clearly enough, once you name it for exactly what it is, you discover something you were not expecting. You no longer need the apology to feel whole. You needed the truth. And you already had it. 3 months after the ruling, Greta nominated me for Claims Team Lead, a supervisory role with a salary I hadn't allowed myself to want 2 years earlier. I got it. I read the confirmation email in the school pickup line, Delia walking out through the double doors with her backpack sliding off one shoulder, and she spotted my car and ran. I watched her run across that parking lot and thought, she has no idea. She has absolutely no idea what it cost to make this Tuesday afternoon this ordinary. And that's exactly right. That is the entire point of all of it. I found a 3-bedroom apartment in the same school district, larger kitchen, all drawers fully functional, deep closets, morning light on the front windows. The bathroom tiles were still a questionable decade, but it was somewhere we were choosing, not somewhere we were managing to survive. Marcus built a bookshelf in his room on a Saturday. He used a level 3 separate times to confirm it was perfectly straight. Then he asked me to look at it. It was perfect. Yeah, I told him. It is. He nodded, satisfied, back to it. 3 weeks after we moved in, Delia found me in the kitchen during dinner prep. She leaned against the counter the way she always does when she has something real to say. She looked around the apartment at the orange curtains she'd picked months ago that had followed us from the first place, at Marcus's bookshelf visible through the open door, at the window catching the early evening light. "Mom," she said, "are we happy here?" 8 years old. Watching me with those dark, steady eyes that catch more than she ever lets on. "Yeah," I said, "we are." She thought about that for a moment. "Good," she said, and she walked back to her homework like the conversation was complete. I kept cooking. I thought about a porch in April. I thought about a door. I thought about a woman who told me I'd made my bed. And I thought about how strange it is that the worst thing that happened to me handed me the exact freedom I never would have claimed for myself. She closed a door. I built a house. The first call I got from my mother after the custody ruling was not what I expected, and what she opened with had nothing to do with an apology. Yvette called on a Thursday evening in late spring, almost 8 months after the porch. She hadn't called once in that stretch, not directly, not about anything real. But word travels the way it does in a town that isn't large. People talk. And apparently what people had been talking about was how things had turned out for me. You know, she said, family is important. We're not getting any younger. We miss you, Nadia. We miss the children. I let her finish. Mom, I said, I know family is important. I've believed that my whole life. That's why I showed up at your door with my children. And you closed it. A pause. The kind of pause that knows it was supposed to be an apology and chose, again, to be silence. We were worried about Jerome, she said. We didn't want to take sides. What exactly do you say to someone who, when it actually mattered, chose everyone except you? I thought about everything in that silence. The motel, the crackers, the bathroom floor, Marcus watching me from 2 steps back, the duffel bag, the overtime shifts, the attorney, the courtroom, the bookshelf. Delia's question. Every single thing I had built alone, steady, real in the months my mother spent worrying about Jerome's comfort. I understand, I said. I do understand. I understood that. Understanding something doesn't mean forgiving it on their timeline. The people who left you to figure it out alone will almost always return the moment you've figured it out. And you'll face a decision no outsider will ever fully understand, not whether to let them back in, but on whose terms you choose to exist in their presence. I haven't shut my mother out. But I haven't pretended, either. We talk occasionally. She is careful now. I am measured. She is learning that measured is what she gets. What my family believed that leaving me alone would teach me my limits turned out to be exactly right. It did teach me something, just not what they intended. What I want you to actually hear isn't the custody verdict, or the supervisory title, or the 3-bedroom apartment. The day I drove away from that porch, I made a decision. Not to prove something to Yvette, not to show Jerome, not to reach the scene where they see my face and realize they were wrong. I made a decision for me, for Marcus, and for Delia. I decided that the door that had just closed on us was the last door I was ever going to knock on without being certain of the welcome first. That decision is where everything else came from. Not luck, not a system that suddenly worked in my favor, not a dramatic rescue. Just one decision, made by a woman standing on a porch at dusk with 2 kids in the car and no plan extending past the next 12 hours. What would you build, what could you build, if you finally stopped waiting for permission from the people withholding it? If you're watching this right now, and you are standing at some version of that porch, if someone who should have held the door open just closed it instead, I need you to hear this clearly. You do not need their belief to build something real. You only ever needed yours. Every woman who has ever been told there is no room for her and built her own room anyway already knows this. And if you're just learning it right now, this community is exactly where you belong. Hit like 4 when family revenge strikes, not because it serves the algorithm, though it does, but because it means you stayed until the end. And the women who stay until the end already understand something important about what they're capable of. Subscribe. This is a community of women who have rebuilt from starting points that looked impossible. We are not finished. A shut door is the only one that sets you free.